introduction. Yes, so it is indeed Halloween. And when Vajrayana wrote to me suggesting the theme for the talk I was going to give this evening, he definitely mentioned Halloween, that it was an opportunity to, really go into some aspects of the Dharma, that this night gives us the opportunity to go into certain things connected with this general theme of the Vajrayana, the way of the diamond thunderbolt. And I don't think I've ever actually given a talk on a Halloween night. At Padmavajra, Halloween is marked because we've got a bit of a reputation for quite an impressive Halloween night for the local children. The front of Padmavajra really does look like a haunted house. I mean, it is quite an old house, and it's very dark going up to it. And there are pumpkins and skeletons in the windows, and the children get quite scared coming up to the doorway. But and we always worry a bit that we've gone over the top a bit. But in the lead up to Halloween, all the mothers bump into us and say, "Are you going to do it this year?" They're all talking about it. And so anyway, I'm sure something's going on at Padmavajra. But I must admit, I've never really reflected that deeply on Halloween because, its commercialization has not been, when things get commercialized, you tend to, I tend to just think, oh goodness, let's leave that. But I did a little bit of research, and I was looking at an article by a very fine historian of pagan festivals, Ronald Hutton, which happens to be my father's name, so that's why I like him. And he points out that this was a great Northern European festival, originally, a great Northern European festival, and it's marking the movement from summer, autumn, into the darkness of winter, light into dark. And it was a time of, all the foodstuffs are gathered in, so there's notions of homecoming and feasting, but also definitely marking going into a very, very difficult time because, of course, the winter time, these are times before anything like electric light or anything like that. We're talking about a very different kind of world from the world we're in now. It was a time when people died. So you needed to really mark this period. And of course, over time, it developed in all sorts of ways. It's a thin time where the souls of the dead are alive and around. It's a thin time between different worlds, the world of, if you like, sense experience that we're very well aware of, and a time of where the hidden world becomes more vivid to us. It's interesting, my mother was telling me that, and I do vaguely remember this, my father's mother was an old Cornish lady, and every year at this time, my father would put money out on the back step. It was an absolutely sort of religious duty, and the money was always gone the next day, and I didn't nick it either, because that was for the fairies, that was for whoever was around. So even these traditions have sort of carried on, and it's very important, I think, that for us to kind of acknowledge these deep traditions, if you like. And it's very easy, I think, to get alienated from these shifts in the seasons with, the electric light, 24-hour news, electronic media, all the different things that we're involved with. It's not so easy to stay in touch with the movement of things. And I was just looking out of the window. I'm staying in Pete's lovely room in the community, and he's got a very nice view of the trees in the garden, and just noticing how they're just shedding and fading. And it's been a glorious autumn, but and the night drawing in, you can really feel, yes, we are moving from the light to the dark. This is a different time, a thin time. And thin times of transition, are regarded in Buddhist tradition of times of great opportunity. You have this notion of in Sanskrit, antarabhava, the between two becomings, the between two existences. Something is passing away, something isn't quite arising yet, it's about to arise. In Tibetan Buddhism, this notion was translated as bardo, bardo meaning between two existences. And in Tibetan Buddhism, they identify a number of bardos, a number of spaces, a number of opportunities in which something is coming to an end, something is about to arise. And in that space, you can make very, very big changes. Very, very big changes indeed. I mean, they say, for example, life itself is a bardo. It's between birth and death. So this is a fabulous opportunity. It's a fabulous space. The human opportunity itself, the human existence itself, is absolutely incredible. It's brimming with potential if we would but realize it, rather than something oppressive, which sometimes we can so often feel it is. It's actually a very wonderful open space filled with promise and opportunity. Might say a bit more about that later. Dream and sleep is a bardo between two waking states. That wonderful world of dream. I always notice this time of year as it gets darker, my dream life becomes more vivid. It's a time of being, in a way, not exactly forced inward, but in a sense you are. There's less light. So the inner life can become incredibly vivid. And dream is regarded as a place of serious spiritual practice. It's very open. Dream is a very flexible space. You can have these big dreams where things can happen. You can even mold what happens in the dream space. If you become aware when you're dreaming, you can go and meet the Buddha. If you suddenly wake up in a dream, I've had this myself. Not long after I was ordained, I became aware that I was dreaming. I thought, I know, I'll go and see Padmasambhava, my archetypal teacher, and I'll go and receive a teaching. So scene change, I'm going up a hill, up a mountain, he's round the corner, and then there was terror, utter terror. And I forced myself out of that dream state into the waking state. So you have to be a bit careful with these malleable realms. Meditation is a bardo, especially deep meditation. It's the space between two thoughts. Deep meditation, there is no thinking, there's no neurotic thought activity. It's an open space of very clear, bright awareness where anything is possible. Even death is regarded as a bardo, a space where you can work. It's between, when you die, that's between the moment of death and the moment of being reborn in a new life, according to Buddhist tradition. And death is seen as an incredible opportunity, not at all a kind of problem if you're properly trained for it, because sense experience dissolves and everything is open. And consciousness can just expand, even to enlightenment itself. So this is the notion of the in-between. And we're now in an in-between. There are other in-betweens that you'll find in your life. It's very important, I think, to identify spaces in your life. Every day there are spaces. You've stopped one activity. You haven't quite started the next. The temptation is to fill it with, putting on the radio or listen to a bit of music. No, keep that space. Just refresh your awareness in that space between the events and see what opens up in that space. Sometimes spaces can open up when there's big life changes. You might lose your job or leave your job, or a relationship ends, illness, anything really. There can be these one kind of, if you like, habitual process comes to its end, comes to its conclusion. Either you've decided to do it or it's decided for you. And then there's a possibility of new creativity. So it's very important to look for these spaces, open to these spaces. They're times of great possibility, great opportunities to make real progress in Dharma life. Very, very rich, these open creative spaces. So tonight, traditionally, we're in a kind of liminal place. We're moving from summer, autumn into winter. We're going into that deep journey into the dark, maybe the cold, we don't know, with global warming and all that. We're going into the dark. We're going perhaps going to be more internal, yes, and maybe it's a time when all sorts of spirits are abroad. So we need to, we need a master. We need someone, a guide for the in-between, a guide, a master of life and death. So we're going to learn from this figure here, Padmasambhava. This is Amoghavangsa's painting, painted by an order member named Darloka, who's a very close friend of mine. And what I want to do is talk about this picture and see what we can learn from it about how we can look at these spaces that we enter, look at the whole area of life and death, what we can learn from this figure, because it's an icon. It's these images. That's not really Padmasambhava. That's a painting. That's pigment and canvas and board. But it's a kind of map. It's a kind of sign. It's indicating there's so much shorthand in there for the whole of Padmasambhava's mythical life. He's a kind of archetypal figure he has some historicity. He emerged in India in the 8th century, had a very weird and wonderful life as a Buddhist practitioner, but is particularly associated with the introduction of Buddhism into Tibet. And he is famous, even infamous, for his encounters with life and death in all its rawness, in all its vividness, and transforming all those experiences onto the path. One of the great things about Padmasambhava's life is that there is absolutely nothing in life that can't be turned to the Dharma. Things that we would think are a complete catastrophe, and are wrecking our life, our Dharma life, to him are wonderful, fabulous, exciting opportunities and possibilities which just lead to a sort of heightened ecstasy. So it's a very important figure, for me, and very important in our own movement. So I want to look first of all at Padmasambhava's robes and his hat. So he's in these different coloured robes. There's a blue, there's sort of white inner shirt, a kind of baggy shirt. There's a blue robe inside, and above it there's a sort of yellowish, reddish robe. And he's got that hat as well. You can see it's all sort of embroidered. I love his robe. He's kind of wrapped and enclosed. It's almost like a kind of protective aura, his robe. And of course, the old Buddhist masters in those days did actually wear robes. That was their clothing. But what the robes indicate here, they symbolize, they point to the fact that Padmasambhava is a master of the entire Buddhist tradition. All of its phases, all of its aspects, the so-called Hinayana, the Mahayana, the Vajrayana. When you read his life story, he studies with all the great masters. He practices all the different sort of systems of practice. Not only does he study, not only does he practice, he makes them, he fully realizes them. So he's a master of Buddhist training. And I think that's the first thing we need to do. If we're going to approach these liminal spaces, life and death, the world of the spirits, if you like, if we're going to start transforming everything, we need some mastery of Buddhist practice, that we need some mastery of that. This is very, very important. When you take up Buddhism, you are entering into a training. Yes, we might come along, first of all, it feels good. Of course, that's important. Feels good, feels right. But if we go on, we've actually got to approach it as a real, we've got to sort of, as Padmasambhava himself says in one of his sayings is you need to wrap yourself in the Dharma. You need to wrap yourself in Buddhist practice. I said earlier that this life itself is regarded as a bardo, a space of tremendous opportunity. And a verse of Padmasambhava is about this. He says, "Oh, now, when the bardo of life upon me is dawning, abandoning idleness, there being no idleness in a devotee's life, entering into the reality undistractedly, may the Trikaya," that's the three aspects of enlightenment, may the Trikaya be realized. And he talks about listening, the path of listening, reflecting, and meditating. That's what we do in this life. We practice the Dharma through listening, reflecting, and meditating. What that means is we need to study. We need to study the word of the Buddha. We need to study the Buddha's teachings, the words of the great teachers. Study here doesn't mean studying like, some of you will think, oh gosh, I didn't do very well at school or university. It's okay, I was thrown out of school when I was 16. It's fine. You don't have to be a graduate to study Buddhism. And other people will think, well, I know what study is because I did so well at university. Well, Buddhist study isn't like that. What you have to do when you read and study Buddhist texts, you don't need to read a lot, but you need to just take it right in. A verse or two, or a few very basic ideas. If you've got a very good mind, of course, take in more. Some people I definitely push a bit harder. I think they're a bit lazy with their studies. Others, you don't push so hard, but you do need to take it in. I mean, it's like anything. If you don't study it, if you don't reflect on it, you're not going to know it. And you need to do that. And what happens, what I find in studying Buddhist texts, and usually it's stuff that it's just those few verses that really hit me. A few verses, say, from the Dhammapada or something like that. They go right into the heart. And then they start becoming a part of me. And they change the way I look at life. They change the way I see things. It's like I'm being through this verse, or even half a verse, I'm being introduced to a much bigger vision of life, a much deeper vision of life. And I take that in, and I can start to see things rather like the Buddha sees them. That's what we're really talking about here. So we need to make the most of our Buddhist studies, but also our Buddhist practices, like ethics, practicing the precepts, meditation, reflecting on Buddhist themes, sharing that Buddhist life with others in the Sangha. I think retreats are really good here if you want to have a real taste of what intensifying Buddhist training is. You need this kind of ballast if you're going to face the sort of trials and tribulations of life. I remember the great cultural critic George Steiner once saying that he was trained in the old French lycée system where you had to memorize reams and reams of the classics. And he said, although it was sort of painful, actually he thought it set him up for life because he had to internalize that wisdom, and it gave him ballast in all the sort of storms and stresses of life. So that's what we're doing with our Buddhist studies. That's what these robes symbolize. They're the kind of protection of the wisdom of the ancients, if you like, in relationship to what's arising, what's coming up. They give you a bigger perspective on all that. So make the most of your Buddhist training, of your studies, of your meditations, your discussion groups, of your reflection, yes, of your pujas and things like that. It's all good stuff for when you have to face the challenging circumstances and situations. They often talk in Buddhist tradition about you practice the Dharma so that the Dharma will protect you in relation to the difficulties that are arising from the spirits that are dancing, maybe on nights like this. They'll give you a way of seeing this material in a very, very clear and deep transformative way. So that's the first thing. It's almost like the preparation. And then Padmasambhava holds in his left hand, I don't know if you can see it there, it's actually a top of a skull turned into a bowl. Tibetans, well, Indians and Tibetan tantrics are very fond of these skull bowls. And it's filled with this, well, they call it rakta, blood, or amrita, nectar. That sort of, bubbling out of it, almost like a cauldron. Now this is a very, very interesting image and symbol, the fact that he holds, and notice the way he's holding it in the gesture of meditation, in the gesture of perfect equanimity. It means he's completely at ease with death and the life, if you like, that pours out of that awareness of death. And it's a kind of shorthand because it's in that image, you've got a reference in a very small image, if you like, to a whole big part of Padmasambhava's mythical life. When he was adopted, he was a sort of foundling. That's interesting, isn't it? He was found by a sonless king and adopted and trained to be the prince of the kingdom. But you have to be a bit careful with foundlings because they don't often turn out the way you want them to. And he started to misbehave quite badly. I won't go into the details. When he was a youth, as youths often can, as some of you parents there know only too well. So they had to exile him. So his going forth from the home life into the homeless life was actually exile. It was more extreme. He'd made himself so unacceptable that he had to be exiled. And where was he exiled? He was exiled in a place called Chili Grove. Chili Grove, which isn't the last stop on the on the bus lines. Chili Grove, Sitavana. Chili Grove was one of the 8 great cremation grounds of ancient India. So this is where he was banished. Now, those cremation grounds of ancient India, cremation grounds even of modern India, are really, really dodgy places. They're not places where good caste Hindus would go. These are places of impurity. Death is associated with impurity in traditional caste Indian society. So people who frequent these places are very, very dodgy characters. And of course, there are also places where, in those days, the cremation grounds near these, in the middle of nowhere, the dead are just left very often and sometimes burnt in great pyres. They're places with a very, very distinct and weird atmosphere. I saw some old cremation grounds in India when I lived there, and I had a very, very weird atmosphere. Definitely you felt you were in an in-between space. Some old graveyards can be like that, can't they? They have that kind of atmosphere. And yes, you could imagine that there would be ghosties and ghoulies, in places like that. So this is where he was exiled. Now, I'm going to read you a passage to give you some idea of what this place was like, Chili Grove. Just to give you a feel. Now, directly to the southwest of the Diamond Throne, there extends for 5 leagues and more the cemetery of Chili Grove, a grove filled with decay, also called the reed bed. Located in an area measuring 1.5 leagues around, it's like a land of precious jewels, level like the palm of the hand, lofty and without hollows. In the middle, where it fell from the hands of the gods, is the stupa, structure which gives happiness. A stupa on the outside, but within a celestial palace made of all sorts of rare substances. In the northwest of the cemetery is the statue of the great god of the world, and Basala, the tree of desires, inhabited by the innumerable multitude of birds of the tombs. The god of the world, Nandikeshvara, rides a black lion, holds a black trident, and wears a flowing robe the colour of red poppies, and with their following of inescapable executors, numbering 10 million, the spirits of the 8 classes are assembled. There are to be seen countless darkinies. These are sort of goddesses, if you like. There are to be seen countless darkinies. Some of them have eyes that dart out sun rays. Others give rise to thunderclaps and ride water buffaloes. Others hold sabres and have eyes which inflict harm. Others wear death's heads, one above the other, and ride tigers. Others wear corpses and ride lions. Others eat entrails and ride eagles. Others have flaming lances and ride jackals. Others, 5-faced, are steeped in a lake of blood. Others, in their numberless hands, carry many generations of living beings. Others carrying in their hands their own heads, which they have severed. Others carry in their own hearts. Others carry in their hands their own hearts, which they have torn out. There are others who have made gaping wounds in their own bodies, and who empty out and devour their own intestines and entrails. There are others who hide and yet reveal their male or female sexual organs, riding horses, bulls, elephants. In the central lake cloud of purification is the carnal ground, the haunted place where others cannot venture. There they stand, sucking the substance of life. And here, Padmasambhava dwelt with his back to the stupa for 5 years, going bright red, teaching the Dharma to the crowd of darkinies. So I wanted to read you that because it is Halloween, after all. You know, they're probably out there, those figures. So what's going on here? What's happening? What's the meaning of this? I mean, in some ways, there isn't one. It's just good to hear the story and get excited by it, you know, and sometimes explanations can be incredibly tedious, but as David Hockney once said, everybody loves an explanation. So let's try and explain if we can, or let's try and evoke something. So, of course, the cremation ground is really dwelling in full awareness of death. That's what it really means. In traditional Buddhism, the cremation grounds are identified with consciousness itself. Absolutely everything is a cremation ground. Everything, you know, because everything is impermanent. Everything is life and death. In some senses, you don't need to go to an exotic place to experience the cremation ground. You just need to become fully aware of your mortality and the mortality of the people around you. But of course, when you start to do that, when you start to enter that, when life itself starts to show that to you, and it can be, you know, very upsetting when it shows it to you if you haven't prepared through practicing the Dharma, it becomes quite frightening. It can become quite frightening when you start to, if you like, face your fears, because sometimes the contemplation of mortality can also arise when suddenly you're thrust into a situation where you feel your limitation very, very keenly. Some people say when they first give a talk, they feel really, really frightened. Suddenly they have to face all their fears. It's never been a problem for me. I have other areas which we won't go into where my fears arise. So the fears are really these darkinies. That's what they really are. All these weird hybrid creatures dancing, doing all those weird, strange things, really are nothing other than a projection of our own fears, of the unknown. Because after all, you know, death and impermanence, and therefore life itself, is completely unknown. We think we know what it's all about. You know, and then you have those experiences where something happened or somebody does something completely untypically. I mean, it can freak you out. Suddenly you can get very, very frightened when your routine breaks up, for example, or something happens, some information comes in about something, and it can be very, very frightening. Padmasambhava is somebody who's trained to actually be fully ready and aware of that. That there is, when the changes happen, when the transformations occur, this is not something to freak out about. It's not something to shrink back from. That description, I don't know if you noticed it, it's actually very beautiful, isn't it? I mean, yes, okay, gaping wounds and all this, but the whole poetry of it, it's really rather lovely. And you can imagine him sitting there just delighting in this incredible display. This is not shocking. This is the transformation of life itself. Just going back to my reflections as I was looking out the window at the trees and the leaves changing colour. Going from that lovely, rich green that we had in the summer to all these mottled colours, and they're ripping up and they're being thrown by the wind, and it's getting darker. Well, maybe they were darkenies. Maybe they were these darkenies. Fortunately, on a lower level, that's not kind of freaking me out. So it's this question of seeing change, seeing impermanence, not as being about loss, which we can so often do, and that leading to depression and despair and hopelessness, but seeing it as meaning that is just infinite potential, infinite possibility. The great yogi Milarepa, another great Tibetan yogi, sings, the more ups and downs, the more arisings and passing away there is, the more blissful I feel. So Padmasambhava goes bright red looking at this wonderful appearance, and he teaches the Dharma. This is really interesting. He communicates the Dharma to these darkenies, to these goddesses, these ogresses. Now, he's not going to give them a lecture on the Four Noble Truths. It doesn't mean that. What it really means is he is the Dharma. He is the Dharma. He's the embodiment of the Dharma. And what he's communicating is, what it really means, he's bringing all that energy, all that creativity onto the path itself. Onto the path, integrating it into a Dharma life, into a spiritual life. I remember when Sangharajta, our teacher, gave a lecture on this particular incident. This was at the London Buddhist Centre not long after its opening. He talked about, sometimes people coming into the centre are like these darkenies. There are people, metaphorically, gouging great chunks out of their guts and things like that, and in all sorts of weird and wonderful states. And he was saying to the order members, well, you have to embrace that. You have to respond to that. You have to kind of integrate that, transform that into the richness of centre life. It's all part of it. Befriend all that, love all that, go bright red in communicating with that. And it's the same with us internally. Sometimes things can be coming up, within us that we think, oh gosh, that's not to do with Buddhism. All these feelings I've got about this, that, and the other, these very intense passions or aversions or something like that, or, desires to kind of be creative in a particular way. I don't know what it might be. And you can sort of think, oh, no, I've got to be really tight and follow this path. Well, maybe not. Maybe you've got to look right into that material and bring it along. Let it enrich, what you're doing. I was saying to somebody today, we were having a chat with Martin, and I was quoting again my good friend Aloka, who talks about you need to worship and serve the gods of useless endeavours. Because he always used to say this to me, says to me, because he's always saying, I should paint. And I think paint, it's a waste of time, isn't it? There's much more important things to do, like read Buddhist texts and talk to people about the Dharma. He says, no, you must paint. You must serve the gods of useless endeavours. Because if you don't, they'll come and bite you on the bum. And that's what these darkenies will do. If you don't incorporate those more sort of vital energies in your Dharma life, they won't go away. They won't, they won't leave you alone. And I think generally, I would even relate that to something even deeper, and that is our own potential for transformation in the Dharma life. If you neglect that potential to grow and change and transform your consciousness up to enlightenment, if you neglect that, if you ignore it, if you think, oh, no, that life isn't for that. I need to do this, I need to do that. For whatever reason, that energy won't be quiet. The energy, the urge to Buddhahood won't go quietly. And it will become destructive. I think this is really interesting. I remember Sangha on one occasion saying, if we resist the evolutionary urge, and the evolutionary urge for us has to be conscious. It has to be conscious evolution of consciousness in the direction of Buddhahood. If we suppress that, if we ignore it, it could become even criminal. And I've certainly encountered that with people, that because they haven't, or it was such a relief to discover the Dharma, because basically they were being eaten up by something because they weren't, if you like, acknowledging that desire to grow and to transform. And it was destroying them. Many friends of mine have told me they would have gone nuts if they hadn't, taken up the Dharma, or they wouldn't even be alive, because there was something that needed, only the Dharma could take that energy. So, there he is with the skull cup. And the nectar, of course, is the bliss. It's called the great bliss nectar. It's the ecstasy of dancing with the Darkinis, of having no fear in relation to death, no fear in relation to the goblins and ghosties all around, seeing all that as an expression of the abundance, if you like, of life and the unflowing of the Dharma. I'm just going to say something about the staff. Sometimes it's in his left arm. The staff is really interesting. It's a trident. It's called Khatavanga, is the Sanskrit, which means something like, the symbolism is that those three prongs destroy greed, hatred, and delusion in one hit. You just go like that, and you've got them all. So the skull and the slightly rotting head and the freshly severed head that are on it symbolize greed, hatred, and delusion. They're like trophies that he's carrying around. And it's very kind of martial, isn't it, all this symbolism? And, the scarf is a sort of banner of victory. But it's also said that the staff is his wisdom companion. His wisdom companion. This is really interesting. Through his dwelling in the cremation ground, the Darkinis become part of Padmasambhava. It's sometimes said that you sometimes have images of Padmasambhavas surrounded by dancing, very colourful, beautiful gods and goddesses. They're all him. They're all his energies. It's sometimes said that he is himself a kind of one-man walking Sangha. He's a kind of cosmos. But it does raise this whole area of Sangha, of spiritual friendship. If we're going to engage with these forces in the world, the challenges that the world throws us, we need friendships. We need vivid, vibrant Dharma friendships. But the only way you can really have friendships and enjoy friendships, lots of them, is if you yourself are a lover. I was going to say a friend, but that's a bit weak. You have to really love very, very strongly your companions in Dharma life. Then the crowd of the Darkinis, the other members of the Sangha, start to arise. One of the things I think that's really interesting about the Buddhist life, you have this kind of double thing. Yes, Padmasambhava goes alone to the cremation ground, symbolizing the fact that we ourselves, we're the only people who can practice the Dharma. Very strong emphasis on individual responsibility in Buddhist practice. It's us that has to face the challenges of life. When it comes to dying, we're going to be on our own. There's nobody going to be with us as we move across that threshold, even if others are around our bed. We are going off into that in-between alone. There's that. And at the same time, you need to do it with others who, in a sense, have realized their aloneness. There's a sort of strange paradox there that in real friendship, in real love between people. It's between people who know how to be alone. And they can sort of share that with one another and encourage that with one another. And then you get real love, I think, because you get a sense of real freedom between one another. So that trident symbolizes that. If you like, he's internalized Sangha and friendship. Even when he's alone, it's with him. But it also means, of course, that he is the supreme spiritual friend. And Padmasambhava is famous as a spiritual friend. And this brings us to the last thing I want to mention. Right down there in the corner, there's a little god or a little demon, little blue demon. And Padmasambhava has got his Vajra, his diamond thunderbolt, above his head. And the demon is bowing. A lovely little detail based on a traditional Tibetan fresco. So there's a whole backstory to this. What it goes back to is the introduction of Buddhism into Tibet. The great king Trisong Detsen became a Buddhist and was encouraging Buddhism in his country and thought we need a fantastic temple and monastery. So he ordered, because kings can do that, he ordered a temple and monastery to be built, and the workmen got on with it. In the day, the walls were going up nicely, and then when they got there the next day, everything had been destroyed. And then the next day they'd build. When they went back the next day after the night, everything had been destroyed. This kept going on, and it was completely mystifying what was going on. And the king was advised by one of the monks, a great monk named Shantarakshita. He said, it's the demons. It's the gods. It's the gods of the soil. It's the Nagas, the dragon spirits of the Tibetan land. They're not happy. They don't want you to build this monastery. You could take it literally, or you could even sort of say, well, it's the Tibetan unconscious resisting the introduction of the Dharma. And we could even see it in our own personal lives. Don't we know it? The night before we go to bed, I'm going to get up early and meditate. Somehow overnight, that whole aspiration that was so clear, so solid the night before, has been completely deconstructed. And you wake up, it's a bit dark, it's a bit cold, just a few more minutes. And before you know it, it's too late, you're rushing to work, you've missed your meditation. It goes on like this. Well, it's the gods, it's your demons inside you which are undermining the foundations of your aspirations to meditate. So we've got to get into communication, with these deeper forces. We've got to get into dialogue with them. So the Indian monk Shantarakshita said, look, there's only one man who can do this, who can actually start communicating with the gods. That's Padmasambhava. He's famous. His reputation for dealing with the Darkanese in the cremation grounds had gone ahead of him. You've got to call him in. He's an unusual character. He's not easy, because these wizard-like characters are never easy, are they? They're awkward customers. But he's the only one who's going to be able to deal with this situation. So Padmasambhava comes along, and I'm going to read you just a short passage, again, a Halloween flavour. Padmasambhava, before he even started to talk to the Tibetans in Tibet itself, and he was very awkward about coming, as all good teachers are, they keep you waiting. You're not going to get served on a plate. And don't bother with the complaints procedure. With a great teacher. It's just not going to happen. They're not interested in complaints procedures. They are their own. They're their own genius, and you have to be ready for them. So he spent a year circling Tibet, circling what were known as the power places, dealing with the gods of the soil, the gods of the lakes, the dragons, the Nagas, all these different sort of spirits. So I'll just read you just to give you a bit of a feel for what went on. This is a Buddhist text, by the way. Then in the autumn, Padma came to the castle of Mangyul. A fury of the region of Jiangzhung, Jamun, the eminent enemy, fantastic names, aren't they? Jamun, the eminent enemy, thought she could crush the Guru between two stone mountains. But he rose up in the sky, and the humiliated fury offered the heart of her life. As her secret name, she was called Debt of Turquoises and Diamonds, and the Guru gave her a great treasure to watch over. Then, on the plateau of the sky, he reached the Black Castle. The white darkening of the glaciers thought a thunderbolt would destroy him, but the Guru, surrounding her with one finger, swept her away into a lake. The terrified Darkini fled as far as the lake of Palmo Paltang. At once the water began to boil, the flesh dropped from her bones, and the Guru, hurling a Vajra, blinded her in one eye. Whereupon she rose above the surface and uttered this supplication, "Face of the Master, O Vajra, Dorje Totrang Sal, I swear I will do no more harm. This solemn promise comforts me. What else can I do? I yield. I approach as the Guru's vassal." And she gave the heart of her life while he bound her by an oath. As her secret name, she was called the unfleshed turquoise and diamond lamp, and he committed a great treasure to her care. Goes on like that, all these strange kind of appearances. So what's going on? What's happening in these stories? What's the message? So these great forces that are obstructing the Dharma. What's Padmasambhava doing? He has this Vajra in his right hand, which is held in the mudra of subduing the gods, subduing the demons. A Vajra is a very interesting symbol. It's like a sort of scepter here. But that's not really what a Vajra is. That's just a sign for a Vajra. A Vajra is a lightning bolt. It's a lightning bolt. It's that energy. You imagine a lightning bolt. I don't know if you've ever encountered a lightning bolt. I have myself. A lightning bolt. Absolutely destructive power. But it's all held in that. It's all mastered. And it's a symbol for reality. It's a symbol also for compassion. There's a great hymn to Padmasambhava addressing him as the lightning bolt of compassion. Can you imagine such a thing? A lightning bolt of compassion. So compassion is that tremendous energy, that tremendous wisdom and energy, absolutely indestructible, totally destructive of ignorance. But what he doesn't destroy. He doesn't just look how beautiful that little godling is. He's really lovely. He'd probably be very, very terrifying if we weren't Padmasambhava, but he's really lovely. So Padmasambhava's Vajra, which is this symbol of reality, of wisdom and compassion, kind of condensed as this lightning bolt energy, he can look directly at the gods. He's not intimidated. He sees with the eye of wisdom and compassion. And the gods, they want to serve that. The gods want to serve that. These gods are very volatile because in a way they don't have anything proper to serve. They don't have anything higher to actually genuinely serve. There's nobody they found who's worthy to serve. Only the enlightened, can be their masters. Only the force of wisdom and compassion is going to be enough for them to, well, as the text says, for them to give the heart of their lives. This is a wonderful expression, give the heart of their lives. It's the word in Tibetan is nyingpo. That's what the word that translated as heart is. Their heart essence. Nyingpo also means essence. But it's also the translation of the Sanskrit bija. And the bija mantra, it means their secret name. The name that only they know. Their hidden name. So the heart of their lives is their name. Padmasambhava's wisdom and compassion, reality itself, draws out what they really are. He names them. He knows what they are. This is very, very important. This is one of the reasons why we have difficulties in our Dharma life, is that we can't name the things that are causing us trouble. If we could name them, we'd be halfway to mastering them and dealing with them. So often we're tripped up because we can't name what's tripping us up. Because the thing about these gods, these demons, create a wonderful kind of confusion. So we can't name them. I mean, you see it particularly with the sort of demon of doubt. Doubt is just fantastic. I mean, it's just so brilliant. You know, doubt in the sense of being unwilling to really commit yourself to anything. That just comes with wonderful confusion. It's very much easier to see it in others. Somebody sort of faffing around, faff around for years and years and years, never getting down to anything. And you're desperately trying to say, no, look at that. Well, just mud and sand and smoke and mirrors. And of course, they never get down to anything. So naming, he gets their names. They release their names for him. Not only that, he gives them a treasure. And these are treasures of the Dharma that he hides. So in other words, they want to serve and they want to protect special teachings. Padmasambhava, the mythology is incredible. The tradition is that Padmasambhava hid Dharma texts all over Tibet for future generations. The famous Tibetan Book of the Dead is one of these texts, so that people can use them in the future. If you like, what they symbolize is the fact that the Dharma is always renewing itself. Buddhists should always be renewing their practice in relation to the shifting and changing circumstances and situations. The kind of circumstances of modern life are bringing out all sorts of new gods and demons, unprecedented issues that we've never had to deal with before. So we particularly need Padmasambhava and his Vajra, his lightning bolt, to name these demons, to show them what they are, and to somehow, if possible, bring them onto the path, to enrich the path, or to protect the Dharma. That's our task. Very, very difficult to do. So I think that's really it. Just to say, just to finish, of course, Padmasambhava did convert all the gods and demons. They did serve the Dharma, and Samye, the monastery of Samye, was gloriously completed. The wonderful description of the dedication ceremony of this monastery, full of all these wonderful Buddha images. And in the dedication ceremony, Padmasambhava's invocations were so powerful, the images just came to life and started to walk around interacting with people. So it's a bit like if you came in here and the Buddha just got off the lotus and started to talk to you about how your meditation's going. And it might freak you out a bit. So this is the kind of quality of Padmasambhava, this sort of magic quality, transforming all these circumstances, life and death. Yes, spirits and gods and demons, and bringing them onto the path. So I hope this has been a helpful Halloween talk. Thank you.